All right, thank you for joining the Saskatchewan Pulse Growers 2022 Annual General Meeting. If you're a voting member today, as you're joining us, we ask that you follow the steps on the screen to set up your voting portal called Slido. Slido will be the way that all registered producers today vote. All voting registered producers must log into Slido to make your vote count. You can open a new window on your computer or on your phone or tablet. Open your browser and enter the URL www.slido.com and enter the code 825711, which is also on the screen, and your participant passcode was sent in an email on Thursday or Friday. That code is RVFBDG for voting producers only. If this is your first time in Slido today, you may be prompted to complete your profile. Please fill in your first and last name and then click Join Event. You should then see a screen where there's currently no poll running. Please just keep this open and ready for the voting portions of the meeting. If you require technical support at any point, please call 306-683-8900, as well as the Slido event code is on the bottom of all slides throughout the meeting if you encounter any issues. The way we'll be running motions, resolutions, and questions today will be as follows. We'll ask for a mover and a seconder. And to move or second a motion, please enter the word move or second in the Zoom chat at the bottom of your screen. When prompted for either questions or discussion, if you'd like to comment, we ask that you raise your hand. To raise your hand in Zoom, click the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom window. All voting on motions and resolutions, again, will happen in Slido, which you should have open in a separate tab, window, or device. And if you're just joining us, again, all voting will take place in Slido, so please open slido.com on your phone, tablet, or computer and enter 825711 as the event code. And your participant passcode is in your email from SPG on Thursday. Again, for anyone in the room today, if you're accessing a floor mic at any point in time, please keep your mask on. And I'll pass things over to Sean now.
Okay, thanks, Emmer. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Saskatchewan Pulse Growers AGM. My name is Sean Dearland. I'm chair of the Saskatchewan Pulse Growers Board of Directors. Before we begin the business portion of our meeting today, I would like to take a moment to recognize this year's recipient of the Pulse Promoter Award, brought to you by Saskatchewan Pulse Growers. The Pulse Promoter Award recipients are chosen annually by SPG to recognize outstanding contributions to the pulse industry. This year's recipient of the Pulse Promoter Award is Dr. Bunyamin Turan, professor and plant breeder at the University of Saskatchewan's Crop Development Center and Ministry of Agriculture, Strategic Research Program Chair in chickpea and flax breeding and genetics. Bunyamin joins the CDC in 2000 as a postdoctoral research fellow and was appointed chair in chickpeas breeding in 2010. Bunyamin's research is focused on the development of superior chickpea cultivars for Western Canadian environments and has released 16 chickpea varieties over the years. Bunyamin has also been a major contributor to grower extension and translation of the results of his work to stakeholder groups. He has presented at many SPG meetings over the years, sharing information on new pulse crop varieties and production information with growers, with a particular focus on smaller acreage pulse crops, a key focus area for SPG. On behalf of SPG, I'd like to congratulate Bunyamin for his tremendous achievements. Bunyamin had a conflicting speaking engagement today in his pursuit to continually share his knowledge. At this time, we'd like to share a video we captured with Bunyamin and his award.
Good morning. First, I'd like to thank you, the Saskatchewan Pulse Growers, for selecting me to be the recipient of the 2021 Pulse Promoter Award. I'm extremely honored to be receiving such an important award. And I'm also grateful for the Saskatchewan Pulse Growers for the recognition I have received for my works. This award would not have been possible without the inspirations I have received from my colleagues at the Crop Development Center, as well as all the pulse growers. All the pulse growers in the province. Okay, I extremely thank you to you, the pulse growers, who continue to grow chickpeas and to produce chickpeas, the best chickpeas in the world. With this award, I promise myself to continue to work even better so that all of you can enjoy even better chickpea cultivars in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to officially congratulate Bunyaman and thank him for the work he does to develop new chickpea varieties for Saskatchewan and always being a positive contributor to the pulse industry. Now moving into the formal business portion of our meeting. To run our AGM, we must have a quorum of 25 growers. I believe we have 54 with the online and in person. I'm told we have enough growers present, so we can get started. I'll now call the meeting to order. Voting members should have received a copy of the AGM agenda and minutes from the last annual general meeting via email on Thursday. These are also available at saskpulse.com under news and events and AGM. Our latest annual report was also circulated by email and can be found at saskpulse.com on our homepage. Inside the annual report, you'll find SPG's latest audited financial statements. The resolutions portion of the meeting will take place towards the end of today's meeting. Resolutions can be brought forward from the floor by any voting member by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen when prompted to do so during that portion of the meeting. By doing so, you'll be given audio control to speak to your resolution. A resolutions template was included in Thursday's email. Resolutions are an opportunity for pulse growers to provide direction to the board. Any resolutions received today will require a mover, a seconder, and a majority vote. Also, following the resolutions portion of today's meeting, we'll open the floor for a grower question and answer period. Growers may bring forward questions for the board on any topic not already addressed at today's meeting. Now let's move into the agenda of today's meeting. The first agenda item is to adopt and review the agenda. Could I please have a mover and seconder to adopt the agenda as presented? I've got Corey Leeson as mover. Jason Hennis seconds. We'll now ask for voting. All in favor in Slido. And that is carried. Our second agenda item is review of the minutes from the last AGM on January 12th, 2021. These minutes were made available to you by email. Are there any errors or omissions? If there are no errors or omissions, could I please have a mover and seconder to adopt the minutes of the 2021 AGM? Trent moves and Jared Gust seconds. Okay, we'll now ask for voting. All in favor in Slido. And that also carries. Okay, the third item on our agenda for today is introduction of the board. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce your 2021 Board of Directors. In addition to myself, the 2021 SPG directors included Chad Dirksen of Dalmany, Vice Chair, Brad Blackwell of Dinsmore, John Bumbach of Assiniboia, Jason Hennis of Etonia, Corey Leeson from Radisson, Trent Richards from Assiniboia, Winston Van Stavern from Creelman, and Terry Uswa from Nipawin. This is also the close of our first term with our new 9-member board. Our board size officially increased from 7 members to 9 this time last year as an outcome of regulatory change driven by producers at previous AGMs. At the close of this meeting, we'll be welcoming 1 new director to the SPG board, Mario Gadet from Melville. I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge guests from other provincial and national pulse and soybean organizations who have joined us virtually today. The fourth agenda item is declaration of election results. SPG received 3 nominations for 3 open seats on the board of directors. Therefore, the 3 nominees were acclaimed and no election was required. I was one of the nominees and was acclaimed for my 2nd term on the SPG board. Trent Richards was also acclaimed to the SPG board of directors and will be returning for his 3rd term. Finally, Mario Gadet will be newly joining the board this year. Mario joins us from Melville and was acclaimed to join us for his 1st term. Chad Dirksen did not seek re-election and his time with the SPG board will come to a close following today's meeting. On behalf of the board and staff, I would like to thank Chad for his time and valuable contributions to the SPG board of directors over the past 3 years. Could I please have a mover and seconder to accept the election results as presented in the Zoom chat? Morris Berry moves. Ian Marzal. Boxall seconds. Thank you. We'll now ask for voting. All in favor in Slido. And that is also carried. Thank you. Our 5th agenda item is business arising from the minutes. SPG received 3 resolutions at last year's AGM, which we'll report on now. 1 was related to carbon sequestration and 2 are related to grain sales reporting. And we'll report on those 2 together. The first resolution was related to having producers paid for carbon sequestration, submitted by Dave Marzolf and is up on the screen. SPG has been working closely with other Saskatchewan crop commissions to advocate on carbon topics over the last year. In March, SPG and other crop commissions, Sask Soil Conservation Association, Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities, and Agricultural Producers Association of Saskatchewan wrote to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada to make the case for creating a carbon offset protocol that recognizes and rewards growers for the significant removal of carbon in contribution to Canada's climate change goals. We also issued a news release calling on producers to participate in the review of the federal government's proposed greenhouse gas offset credit system regulations. In April, the crop commissions provided input to Saskatchewan's offset program and protocol development and sent letters to Premier Moe and Saskatchewan Minister of Agriculture Merritt, as well as Minister of Environment Keating. The crop commissions also met with Ministers Merritt and Keating in April to discuss this topic. However, both federal and provincial governments have advised that zero-till will not be eligible for carbon offset credits within a regulated offset system. Governments have told us that an activity is no longer eligible for offset credits once it passes a threshold of 40% adoption. Zero-till is widely practiced in Saskatchewan with a 75% adoption rate. Saskatchewan crop commissions have engaged with help of a government relations firm to assist with strategy and advocacy on carbon policy issues in order to know which issues are coming down the pipe that we need to be ahead of. Pulse Canada is also commissioning an economic carbon report related to the pulse industry specifically, which should be made public in early 2022. The report will provide the Canadian pulse sector with an instrument to highlight pulses as a tool to decrease effects of agriculture on climate change and align with the goal of carbon neutrality by 2050, while also highlighting the economic contributions of production, processing, and exports of pulses on the Canadian economy. We plan to continue to advocate on carbon policy topics on behalf of producers in the coming year. To learn more about this and other government policy topics, the firm we and other crop commissions are jointly working with will be making a presentation to growers tomorrow at 2:15 p.m. online at the same Zoom link you're on today. The second and third resolutions were related to grain sales reporting. The first was submitted by Terry Usla and the second by Dave Marzolf, and both are up on the screen now. Since these two resolutions are similar, we'll cover both of them with this response. SPG worked with other crop commissions to examine export sales reporting in the US and the potential applicability in Canada. SPG and other crop commissions each made submissions to the Canada Grain Act review in April of 2021. That submission was posted on our website and highlighted in our Grower e-newsletter. SPG's submissions indicate strong support for the creation of a mandatory sales reporting system for grain sales over a certain daily volume and weekly reporting of all grain sales. Under this system, information could be aggregated and released publicly on a weekly basis. Sask Wheat published a report outlining the need for sales reporting and how a system could work. The Mercantile report provides a comprehensive overview on data gaps in grain markets and the solutions required to put producers on an equal footing when planning their cropping decisions and marketing their production. SPG obtained input from market analysts for additional information. SPG worked with Grain Growers of Canada to ensure sales reporting was included as a recommendation in their Grain Act review submission as well. The 2021 federal election delayed the government's next steps on the Canada Grain Act review, but we expect this to pick up now in the new year. SPG will continue to press for action on the creation of a sales reporting system. Is there any other business arising from last year's minutes? If so, please raise your hand in the room or click raise hand in Zoom. John Bumbach has his hand raised. I think we can give John, should have audio. John, you should have audio access now.
John,
Oh, that's fine. I hit the raise button accidentally, so there's no problem. Thank you, Sean, and you're doing an excellent job there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay, if there's no other business arising from last year's minutes, we'll move on to our next agenda item, the organizational update. We'll start with my chair's report. This year started positively through although very different from other years, with an entirely virtual AGM last January. Although it was very unfortunate that we could not all be in a room together, it was also great to have 65 registered producers participating, the highest number since 2017, and before that, 2004. This January marks the close of the first year for SPG's new 9-person board, something that officially took effect last year as a result of producer feedback from a past AGM. It has been great having the additional minds and diverse backgrounds around the board table this year. On advocacy, we've been listening and engaging with growers as an important part to SPG. We took feedback at last year's AGM and other producer meetings that SPG should be doing more to advocate for growers on pulse-specific topics, but also on some important policy topics impacting producers more broadly, where a shared voice with other producer groups may go further. This past year, SPG has done more to address several key policy topics and has jointly worked with other provincial crop commissions, Pulse Canada and Grain Growers of Canada, to leverage this greater voice on your behalf. We were active in providing input into the Canada Grain Act review, including the need to establish an export sales reporting system, which we spoke about earlier in response to last year's resolutions on that topic. We worked with other crop commissions to provide input to the Government of Saskatchewan's carbon offset protocol development and continue to work to effectively provide strategies on this topic, as was already mentioned as well. During this summer's drought, groups also collaboratively submitted a letter to the Western Grain Elevators Association, urging grain companies to waive admin fees on contracts that may not be able to be filled due to lower than expected production. We are continuing to explore any additional actions that could improve grain contracts for producers in the future. Many growers know that SPG has a strategic focus to increase the yields of established pulse crops, including peas and lentils. But many know less about the work that SPG does related to fostering the adoption of smaller acre crops like chickpeas, faba beans, soybeans, dry beans, and fenugreek. SPG's focus on these crops is to help ensure growers have multiple pulse crop options for every arable acre of land in Saskatchewan. I wanted to quickly highlight some of the recent important work happening in this area. In 2019, a chickpea health issue was first detected in Saskatchewan, and more work has been done each year to better understand this issue. The chickpea health issue appears to not be linked to one specific cause, and instead seems to be a combination of issues, including environmental stresses. Widespread sample collecting happened in 2021 with weekly monitoring of 5 chickpea fields with established moisture probes and weather stations. Further evaluations and testing continues, including 156 samples collected from 28 fields in southern Saskatchewan as part of a new research project through AAFC on the impact of herbicides, moisture, disease, and fungicides on chickpea. In addition, 60 samples from 28 fields were collected and sent to the University of Guelph for diagnostic testing to gather more information on this ongoing issue for chickpea growers. Fenugreek was also recently added to SPG's mandate. We sought input from fenugreek producers in late 2020, which helped to inform the development of a strategy to support fenugreek production in Saskatchewan. This strategy includes a focus on fungicide options, herbicide screening, harvest aid options, rhizobia inoculant screening and development, and input into the federal minor use pesticide priority list. We'll now move on to breeding. Since the late 1990s, SPG has had a long-term breeding relationship with the Crop Development Center and has received royalty-free access to pulse crop varieties developed by CDC. It has been a valuable partnership for Saskatchewan producers, and well-adapted varieties developed by the CDC has been a significant driver of growth of pulse production in the province. SPG was interested in continuing a similar type of arrangement, but the CDC decided to move to a different model with multiple funders and to generate revenues through royalties on future varieties. As a result, SPG has taken a new look at how it can continue to support pulse breeding and variety development for the future. As apprehensive as farmers are about moving away from future royalty-free varieties, I believe new breeding agreements we are working on will also be of significant value to farmers. There are a couple of points I want to repeat and reassure farmers on. All current varieties released by SPG to seed growers in 2021 and that are going to be released in 2022 will be royalty-free. We'll have access to the genetic material that we have contributed towards, and we'll be able to use it for future breeding agreements, either with the CDC or with other organizations. We have redefined our R&D strategy to focus on the things that are the highest priority to producers. These long-term objectives for breeding include root diseases, herbicide tolerance in lentils, and agronomic practices that improve end-use quality of pulses. There's a lot that is changing and a lot to be excited about as we go forward. As we look forward to the future, we expect that producers will pay for access to new varieties through royalties, just like you do in other crops such as wheat. This is one of the reasons why we want to stay involved in any future breeding, as we want a seat at the table when decisions are being made and breeding priorities are being set. We are excited about the future for pulse breeding and the ability to partner with a number of private and public organizations to develop the best possible genetics for Saskatchewan producers. There are a couple of key principles that our board has developed that is and will continue to guide our investments and partnerships moving forward. First, we're approaching this with an investor mindset. There has to be a return on investment for growers. The board has been clear that if SPG is going to invest grower levy dollars upfront, and if growers will pay a royalty on new varieties, then a portion of those royalties will need to flow back to SPG for reinvestment back into research, market development, and other areas. Secondly, there would have to be value sharing with growers in the pricing of any new varieties SPG is involved in funding. We want to avoid a situation where new varieties are priced in a way that the most of the incremental value for growers is captured in the cost of the seed. Without these principles, SPG will not invest. Pulse crop acres have increased significantly over the last 25 years. New technologies and breeding approaches have opened up new possibilities for breeders. We think there is an opportunity to attract new breeders and breeding investment for varieties that perform well in Saskatchewan. Increased competition and collaboration can help us overcome some of our greatest constraints to pulse production in Saskatchewan. SPG is funding work on pulse breeding with other breeding organizations such as CDC, J4 Agriscience, and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. The programs are focused on key priorities such as lentils and herbicide tolerance, root disease resistance, and increased protein content. We're also working on some new additional partnerships that we are very excited about and hope to be able to announce and make public very soon. SPG has also committed funding in support of pea, chickpea, and dry bean breeding at the CDC for the next 3 years, along with Western Grains Research Foundation, Alberta Pulse Growers, and the Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture. We look forward to continuing to work with the CDC on this and other projects in the future. So in summary, there's a lot of changing in SPG's approach to pulse breeding. We are excited about new partnerships and new investments that can continue to deliver value for producers in the future. I look forward to talking in more detail about some of these very soon. I'd like now to invite SPG's Executive Director, Carl Potts, for some additional comments from the organization.
Okay, thanks a lot, Sean, and thanks everybody for joining us here today. Really excited to have everybody join our AGM. So I'm going to build on Sean's chair's report. He's done a good job of covering things, I think, at the high level and the strategic level, and I'm going to delve into a few things more on the operational side as well. So really 3 main areas of things that I want to cover here today: 2021-22 budget, so our current fiscal year budget. I want to talk a little bit about SPG's financial situation overall, as well as provide some highlights from the 2020-2021 fiscal year. So to start with our 2021-22 budget, on the revenue side, our revenue budget for this fiscal year is $14.5 million. And the vast majority of that really comes through levy revenue. So we have a levy revenue budget figure at $13 million for this year. Of course, the drought and the heat earlier in the 2021 production year is going to have a significant impact in terms of where that all plays out, as well as pulse prices. But that's where we had set levy revenue back in July of 2021 when we were going through our budgeting process. We also receive revenue from commercializing CDC pulse crop varieties through the sale of breeder seed, as well as revenue from tender agreements that we have in those small number of cases where we tender out varieties to other participants. Other major sources of revenue for us include expense reimbursement for some leveraging that we're able to receive for our market development expenses. And we also receive some sponsorship revenue for things like meetings, and we expect to receive some government leveraging for some demonstration projects that we have planned for the upcoming year. We also have about $165,000 budgeted for interest and dividends on investments and reserves that we hold. If we move to the expenditure side of our 2021-22 budget, total expenditure budget of $12.6 million overall. Over 50% of that is invested into R&D. We have about $2 million invested into market development, both through work that we do directly here at SPG, as well as contributions to Pulse Canada's market development work. We have $775,000 budgeted for market access work, primarily led by Pulse Canada, and about $859,000 for communications work that's focused mainly on grower communications that I'll dive into a little bit deeper in my presentation. We have $714,000 budgeted for the costs related to variety commercialization. That includes seed production costs as well as other costs as a result of commercializing varieties through the breeding agreements that we've had in place. So overall, that works out to revenue of about 14.5 million, expenses of 12.6, and a budgeted surplus for our current fiscal year of about 1.9 million overall. So I want to just take a little bit of time and talk about SPG's financial situation overall. So prior to 2019-20, SPG's revenue declined very significantly over a course of a few years, resulting in a combined total deficit of about 12.9 million between 2016-17 and 2018-19. So as part of that, we cut back on our expenditures significantly over that time period, and we put a pause on new investments in R&D. So some of the things that happened there is that we reduced our levy rate from 1% to 0.67%. And then we had lentil prices starting to decline over that time. India put on import duties in 2017, as well as quantitative restrictions. And so we had a significant reduction in market prices, really, particularly for peas and lentils, that really resulted in a significant decline in revenue over that time. So this chart just shows how we were able to adjust over time by reducing our expenditures over time and ultimately drawing on our accumulated reserve to fund those deficits over those years. And this chart just shows surplus or really revenue and expenses over that period of time as well. So again, starting in 2017, the red bars are expenses and blue bars are revenue, showing revenue being lower than expenses as that revenue declined over time. In 2019-20, pulse prices started to rebound and created a surplus for the first time since 2015-16. So you can see as we had that revenue decline and then revenue starting to pick up again. So if you've had a look at our annual report and our financial statements, you'll see that we're carrying $11.9 million in unrestricted net assets at the end of 2020-21. And that's higher than we would normally be targeting. And I want to talk about some of the reasons why that's the case. So SPG has a financial reserve structure that's broken out into a few different categories. So one of the categories is the organizational closure reserve, which is at 1.6 million. That's really intended to set aside funds to cover expected closure costs if SPG would need to be wound down at any time. We have 665,000 invested in capital assets, but the most significant part of our overall reserve structure is our revenue variability reserve, which is currently at $14.1 million. So this is really meant to be able to sustain a significant revenue decline due to prices or production or some combination of those two over a period of 3 years. And so that we don't have to make large adjustments to expenditures over time. And in terms of strategic investment reserve overall, as I mentioned before, we have unrestricted net assets of almost $12 million, and that's larger than we would normally expect. So that amount is available for investment, and that's what I want to talk a little bit more about. So most of that unrestricted net asset balance comes from an operational surplus in the 2020-2021 year of $9 million. And that's really due to three main factors. We had budgeted a surplus of $4.35 million for that year. We had, at the time of budgeting, we had stronger pulse prices than we had earlier, which increased our budgeted revenues at that particular time. And at that time, we were planning to rebuild our R&D investment portfolio overall. So we had a budgeted surplus going into 2021 of $4.35 million. On the revenue side of things for 2020-21, we had a budgeted, or we had a surplus of $2.3 million over budget on levy revenue. And that was mainly due to a tremendous strengthening of lentil prices over the time that we budgeted in 2020 in July to the end of the crop year at August 2021. So just to give you an idea, green lentil prices over that time period were up 85% relative to budget. Red lentil prices were up 65% relative to budget. So a very strong increase in lentil prices was the main cause for that revenue variance. On the expenditure side, we were under budget by $2.3 million. And we take a lot of effort and focus to try to ensure that in most years that we can execute on our expenditure budget. But there's a few reasons why we weren't able to do that in 2020-21. First of all, R&D, some of our rebuilding of our R&D investments and expenses are taking longer than we expected. We need to look for good, solid projects to make those investments. And we weren't able to fully get there in the 2020-21 year. Some of that's a timing issue where some of those new contracts and new payments will be coming in our current fiscal year. But as we rebuild R&D investments, we're really looking for the best possible opportunities to make those, make those investments overall. The other elements relate to communications and market development. So COVID had a really big impact on the events in communications and market development that we could undertake. Many activities needed to be scaled back or needed to be held online, which resulted in reduced expenditures for that work overall. So altogether, a $2.3 million under budget on the expenses. So those three factors together really come up with our large large operational surplus in 2020-21. So the plan really is to continue to rebuild investments in R&D and other areas and utilize that excess reserve in good investments and good projects there. So the final portion of my overview here today was just to provide some highlights of some of our work in 2020-2021. And all of our work is guided by our 5 key result areas or strategic objectives, they might be called in other organizations, but increasing yields of established crops, expanding the utilization of crops and making investments in market development, developing and adopting new pulse crops. So this is where smaller acreage crops fall into this particular category. As the world's largest exporter of pulses, we need to ensure that we have access to international markets. So decreasing barriers to market access is a key focus, and increasing our engagement with growers is also one of our key priorities. So to touch on R&D, we made new research investments in the past fiscal year, $1.2 million in new investments in the areas of root rot, pulse fertility, herbicide resistance, fungicide use, covering peas, lentils, chickpeas, and faba bean projects. SPG's investment here is leveraged 3-to-1 with other co-funding partners for a total project cost of about $4.8 million overall. So we're able to get good leveraging of grower levy dollars for these pulse-related projects. As part of these investments, SPG committed funding to pea, chickpea, dry bean breeding projects at the CDC over the course of 3 and 4 years there, I think, for those projects. So we're pleased to be able to provide some additional support to CDC breeding projects for those crops. SPG also took over the responsibility for regional variety trials for pulses and soybeans last fiscal year. So that covers 6 crops, 185 entries, 25 companies, 75 trials with 12 different cooperators, and nearly 5,000 plots overall. But the reason why we undertake this work is really to provide data for growers' variety selection purposes. And for this year and for upcoming years, we're really working to expand that information to provide site-specific information for producers as well. I talked about building demand. We're the world's largest exporter and a large producer of pulses, so we can't just focus on increasing production. We need to build more demand as well. In February of 2021, the US regional restaurant chain Be Good launched a new Mediterranean bowl featuring red lentils. And this was a result of a partnership and a collaboration with SPG. It was launched as a permanent menu item after trialing at select locations. 89% of customers cited their intent to repurchase, and 45% said that they intended to incorporate more lentils into their diet. So this is just meant to show as an example of how we try to really partner with food companies, and in this example, in the food service side of things, to build more demand for pulses, gain more traction on in food products and on menus, and have others copy that as well. In 2021, Pulse Canada undertook and hosted a virtual event targeted at food manufacturers and ingredient processors to highlight the functionality and the benefits of Pulse protein. There were 275 registrants from Canada, from the US, Europe, and Asia that participated in this micro summit. So again, trying virtually to reach those that are interested in using pulses and pulse ingredients in food products. There was also a pulse flour demand project that was undertaken to benchmark the use of pulse flour in the US food service industry. Pulse flour demand nearly doubled in the last 5 years to 230,000 tons and is projected to grow 20% per year for the next 3 years. So as we've all heard about, lots of interest, lots of demand for pulse protein, pulse flour, and other pulse ingredients, and that helps to quantify some projections of where we're headed. Pulse Canada also led some life cycle assessments for pea, lentil, and faba bean. The result of this work really confirms that the Canadian pulse production has a low environmental footprint. The data from these life cycle assessments were published in 2 public databases for the use of food companies and researchers that are conducting assessments of diets and food products with Canadian pulses. And one interesting outcome from a related set of work was when peas are used for feed and pork production, it reduced the carbon footprint of the pork by 18%. So again, trying to quantify the value and benefit from a sustainability perspective of using pulses in food as well as in feed applications. So summing up on building demand, a big movement to virtual this year, obviously. 10 publications authored or co-authored from SPG and Pulse Canada funded projects, 18 presentations at industry events to stakeholder groups, and 4 hosted virtual events. On market access, this work is mainly led by Pulse Canada with a lot of input from SPG and other grower groups and the trade as well, but really being led by Pulse Canada at a national level. Here's an example of some of the things that were tackled this year, and just a few that I wanted to highlight here today. So Pulse Canada worked with Syngenta to ensure the gap between the Canadian and the US MRL for pulses for Diquat or Reglone, as growers will likely know it, was established in the US market, really to try to mitigate the trade risk there. So the MRL for Diquat in the US was set at a very low level, and there's been a gap for many years between Canada and the US. So that's had an impact on the ability to use that product and then be able to export to the US. So that was addressed this year with those MRLs being aligned in these 2 important markets. Pulse Canada also led a coalition of ag groups to call on the federal government to end a longshoreman strike at the Port of Montreal. They launched the Stop the Strike campaign, and this resulted in 160 letters being sent to politicians, and the House of Commons ultimately passed legislation that ended that strike and really restoring access and shipping through the Port of Montreal there as well. Pulse Canada presented to a federal government standing committee on environment and sustainable development to provide comments on the legislation that they were developing to set emissions targets. SPG Director and Pulse Canada Board Chair Corey Leeson provided those comments to that committee, really focusing on the need to have emissions targets and reduction plans that ensure economic competitiveness of the ag sector going forward, and that the ag sector does need to be consulted in the development of those plans as things move forward. And the submission also highlighted that Canadian regulations should not handcuff the agriculture sector with onerous regulations that are not faced by international competitors around the world. So again, part of this advocacy work that we're trying to do to ensure that our voice is heard on the national stage related to climate change and environmental sustainability goals. And finally, engaging with growers is one of our most important strategic priority areas. And this infographic really just gives you a snapshot of many of the things that we've undertaken this year. So post-market reports that we undertake every month. We put together 13 different podcasts on a wide range of subjects. So really trying to develop those mediums that growers can learn about the work that SPG is doing, and also learn about useful production and market information through many different mechanisms, whether or not you want to read it, whether or not you want to listen to it while you're driving or working in a piece of equipment. We had 3 webinars, 7 virtual extension events. We developed fact sheets and articles for our website for agronomists and growers to use, research summaries. And we also undertook a survey of producers, and as a result of that, 85% of growers said they believe SPG provides good to excellent value in return for their levy contribution. And 44% of pulse growers frequently access information that's included in SPG's bi-weekly email newsletter. So that's just a very quick snapshot of some of the things that we're doing to help get information out to growers. So as I end, I would be remiss if I didn't recognize the support of our strong, professional, dedicated staff that we have here at SPG that work every day on behalf of pulse producers. So this is just our current staff complement, some of whom are here today, others that are joining virtually. But just want to say a big thank you to all of our staff who do the work in the many areas of work that we undertake. And a big thank you to them for the work that they do. So with that, I'll end my executive director report.
Perfect. Thank you, Carl. We've got a section here for questions. I would ask for questions specifically relating to Carl's and my report. We have at the end of the AGM kind of a general Q&A session. So just in the interest of time, if we could have questions relating to myself or Carl's report, would be great.
So just a question, the online ones are we going to read from here, or do we is somebody going to administer those on our behalf? Just address them in the Q&A. Okay.
Okay. I think we will, there is a couple questions, but I think we'll answer them in the general Q&A session or section. Next, I'll call on Winston Van Staveren. He's a member of the Audit and Finance Committee for 2021 to present the audited financial statements for the 2020-2021 fiscal year.
Next slide. SPG.
Yeah, I think the mic should be live.
SPG is required to have a number of audit opinions completed. The first one is the opinion on the audit of financial statements, which has been qualified because audit procedures do not allow the auditor to verify whether all levy that should have been collected and recorded during the year has actually been collected and recorded. This is a standard qualification for many crop commissions. Opinion on SPG's compliance with the Agri-Food Act and Pulse Crop Development Plan regulations. There were no issues noted in the opinion. And opinion on the controls of the organization to safeguard resources, prepare reliable financial reports, and to conduct activities in accordance with laws, regulations, and policies developed. There were no issues noted in this opinion. And opinion on the proper use of Crown monies. There were no issues noted in the opinion. The statements and other audit reports are included in the annual report beginning on page 21 of the annual report document, which you should have received in Thursday's email and is available at saspulse.com. There are 4 statements that comprise the financial statements: the statement of financial position, the statement of operations, the statement of changes in net assets, and statement of cash flows. These are accompanied by the notes to the financial statements. The statement of financial position and statement of operations will be discussed here. Next slide. The key item for assets is investments. There is $12.6 million in short-term investments comprised of interest-bearing investments maturing in less than 1 year, and equity investments. $1.5 million in restricted investments tied to SPG's operational closure reserve, and there is $9 million in long-term investments. These are interest-bearing investments maturing beyond 1 year from August 31st, 2021. Overall, SPG is carrying $23.2 million in investments. Cash and investments support the reserves required to manage the variability of levy revenue and the operational closure reserve. The revenue variability reserve currently totals $14.1 million, and operational closure reserve is $1.6 million. The remaining $7.5 million above the reserves is being held for suitable program investments. Next slide. Liabilities and net assets. The key items are accounts payable, 1.1 million total. Total net assets of 28.2 million. Internally restricted net assets are 15.7 million. SPG has 1.6 million in reserve in case of an organizational closure, and 14.1 million in revenue variability reserve. Unrestricted net assets are $11.9 million. The increase is as a result of revenues being higher than expenditures from 2020-21. Next slide. The statement of operations. Levy revenue over budget by $2 million. Levy collected was 14.7 million. Budget was 12.7 million. This was by pulse prices in lentils and peas increasing to record levels by the end of the fiscal year, driving higher levy collection. Next slide. Expenses are under budget by 2.3 million. Actual expenses were 7.3 million versus budgeted of 9.6 million. Expenses were less than budgeted due to some adjustments to research projects and delays in the finalization of licensing agreements, creating delays in new investments, as well as activities not able to be undertaken due to COVID-19 restrictions. Next slide. The excess of revenues over expenses. The table shows the result. Revenues totaled 16.3 million. Expenses totaled 7.3 million. And revenues exceeded expenses by 9 million. This was an increase over the budgeted surplus of 4.4 million. Next slide. Could I please have a motion and a seconder to approve the 2021 audited financial statements as presented in the Zoom chat? Ian Boxall moves. And Glenn Wright seconds. We will now ask for voting. All in favor in Slido. That is carried. The next item is the appointment of auditor for 2021 to 22. It is the recommendation of the board that Lingard and Dreger be appointed as auditors for 2021-22 fiscal year. I, Winston Van Staveren, as Audit and Finance Committee member, make the motion to appoint Lingard and Dreger as the auditor for fiscal year 2021-22. Could I please have a seconder on that motion in the Zoom chat? Brad Blackwell seconds that. We will now ask for voting. All in favor in Slido. That carries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Winston. The next agenda item is the resolutions. We received no resolutions by the advanced deadline, and we're now going to move to resolutions from the floor. If resolution is received today, it requires a mover and a seconder to open for discussion. Then it requires a majority vote to pass. Resolutions are considered recommendations to the board and are non-binding. If you would like to bring forward a resolution from the floor, we now ask that you click the raise hand button in Zoom. Resolutions will be taken in a queue, and when it's your turn, you'll be given audio control, introduced, and you can speak to your resolution. We'll also take resolutions from the floor here. Just note, if you're approaching a floor mic, please keep your mask on. I believe we do have one resolution from Glenn Wright. Glenn, if you'd like to speak to that. Yep, we do have it on the, yep, we've got a slide up. Yep, I can. So, oh, I can read, yeah. So Glenn's resolution is, whereas the production year of 2020-2021 was one of widespread drought in the Canadian prairies of an unprecedented nature, and in the last year, Saskatchewan producers have seen grain companies move to recover unfillable forward contracts by unevenly applying service fees and penalties that are both punitive and unfair. And whereas in many cases, these fees are not specific or spelled out in the contracts producers have signed, and whereas the variance in how these punitive measures have been applied has given the appearance of favoritism or bullying in many cases. Therefore, be it resolved that the Saskatchewan pulse growers lobby the government to protect producers with fair contract terms and require grain companies to remove administration fees from contract buyouts when a producer provides evidence of crop failures, require all contracts to include a buyout option clause with a pricing formula at a time of signing that is triggered when producers provide notice of a crop failure, and require these changes to be applied evenly to all grain contracts signed in the province of Saskatchewan, as the case may be within the jurisdiction of the legislating government. So Glenn Wright has moved that resolution. We'll need a seconder to second it. Zenith Faye, seconds. We'll now have time for discussion.
Check. Okay, good. Yeah, this is Glenn Wright here. Hoping people can hear me okay at home. I moved this resolution because I've just seen so many unfair treatments to producers. I've seen buyout fees range from $15 per metric ton to $1.30 per bushel, and in some cases, no buyout fee at all. And as the chair mentioned, this is only a recommendation that would go to the board of the Saskatchewan Pulse Growers, but I think it's important that levy payers empower their board and show support for asking for some basic protection for farmers. I know that in the wheat AGM just earlier this morning, there was some concern about how we, as farmers, seem to have fought for years to open up the markets and to get government from outside of marketing our grain. And to that, I would say that this really isn't about changing the marketing per se. It's just trying to put a standard basic protection only for when there's crop failures. And when there is a crop failure that's beyond the control of a farmer, this is at the time where I think you should be allowed to roll your contract forward without an administration fee or be able to buy it out without an admin fee. These are pretty basic protections, and it's not really impeding the open market. It's just providing protection. And so I would sort of draw a parallel with respect to buying a home. When you buy a home in Saskatchewan, you sign a mortgage and you've got all this draconian language that's drafted by the big banking companies. You're not allowed to, negotiate any kind of changes to those terms. And so you sign that contract. But the banks can't actually take your home in Saskatchewan until you get in front of a judge. And that's because of legislation in Saskatchewan that protects people buying their house. So we're looking for just a simple form of protection here for farmers when it comes to these unfair contracts that are signed. And I just want to point out too that the Western Canadian wheat growers had actually commissioned a legal opinion on these contracts. And it was up on their website for quite a while there. And the last paragraph there is really salient. If you can find that and read it, it's recommending that groups like our crop commissions be doing this kind of action. So I guess what I would just say is I urge all of the members to vote in favor of this recommendation to the board, and hope we can move forward to get some basic protection for farmers.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. Zenith, would you, as seconder, would you like an opportunity to speak?
I'll just add a couple of comments. Producers have to be knowledgeable enough that when they're signing a contract to be able to understand what's in there. And in order to have that transparency, we need to have commissions as well as governments on the page to make sure in this province and in Canada, the governments are obligated to bless the kinds of contracts that we have in place. So it's just a process that we need to make sure that the transparency is there. Producers are educated. So for anyone to be able to, as Glenn had said, signing a contract has to be fully aware of what the implications are if you don't deliver upon a contract. And some of these fees that are bouncing all over the place, we need to have more transparency.
Thank you, Zenith. I think Dave Marzolf, you should have, I think your hand's up and you should have audio control now.
Yep, I'm here. The only thing I got a question about is if you're looking at overall contracts, is it a good time to do it all in one pass instead of piecemeal? Like, I understand the grain contract shortages, but what about protein and contract extensions when grain companies can't take delivery? I'm in favor of the resolution. I'm just wondering if maybe it's time to look at the whole grain contracts and get all these problems solved all at once. That's my only comment.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Is there any other comments either on Zoom or in the room? Okay. Okay, thank you, everyone. We will move now to voting on the resolution. You'll do that the same process that we've done before in Slido. Okay, that resolution passes. Okay, are there any other resolutions to be brought forth? Okay. Okay. Before we move into the grower Q&A, I would like to adjourn the formal portion of the meeting. If I could have a mover to adjourn the meeting. Glenn Wright moves. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Our final item today is to open the floor for questions from producers. We welcome questions from growers on topics outside of what we may have presented already here today. If you'd like to ask a question, please click on the raise hand in Zoom. We'll take the questions in queue. I think we already have a few here. When you're called upon, you will be given audio control to ask your question, and a member of the board or staff will address your question. First of all, we have Gary Meyer with a question on breeding. Gary, I believe you should have audio control.
Mic check, I guess.
Yep,
we
can hear you.
Great. Just a question, reading last year's comments through the minutes there, appeared to me that the growers might be considering starting their own pulse crop breeding program. Has that in fact occurred?
I can take that, and I think Carl has something to add to it. It has not occurred in the way of starting a breeding program. We're going to be investing money in much the same way that was done for the last 15 years in CDC. It'll just be with other partners beyond strictly the CDC. Carl, do you have anything else to?
Yeah, I just add, thanks for the question, Gary. So Sean did cover in his report that SPG is looking at new future breeding partnerships and investments. And we do have some that we already, have in place, more in the form of, shorter term projects. And those are with the CDC, as I mentioned in my report, with Ag Canada through a cluster project, as well as some project work with J4 Agrisciences. But we are also looking at opportunities for longer term investments, additional investments in breeding programs with other partners, and those may be with public or with private breeding partners. But we don't have anything finalized yet. So we don't envision SPG itself as an organization getting into the active business of breeding, but more continuing to make investments with existing breeding organizations and other partners. The difference from what we've had in the past to what we'll have in the future will be is we expect to have multiple partners, possibly on some of the same crops, but also across different crops. So we may have continued investments with CDC, but with other potential partners as well. And so we're excited about that opportunity, about how we can attract more investment, more breeding to the Saskatchewan landscape, to be able to build on the strong success that we've had with CDC over the years.
Gary, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I've been around this pulse grower business for a lot of years. I was one of the originators of the variety release program, and there's always a question in my mind: how long would it last before there was some board desire, I guess, to move into other areas. And, the whole program is designed to work very well as long as the pulse growers maintain their commitment to the CDC funding. And I guess that may have fallen to the side or fallen away, I guess, and causing like, I'm not sure who terminated the agreement with the CDC, but it would be, I guess if the CDC is not satisfied and you're not satisfied, it's a good time to part ways. Try something new.
Yeah, actually, to give a little more details on that, CDC notified SPG before the expiry of the last agreement that they were looking at a new type of agreement with multiple partners and with royalties. SPG did submit a proposal that would have been the same or a similar agreement to what was operating in the past. And I do not believe we even received a response.
Yeah, as CDC was interested in moving to a different model with multiple funding partners. We were interested in continuing a similar sort of an arrangement with large upfront funding and continued exclusive commercialization rights like we've had over the last few iterations of that agreement. But at the end of the day, the CDC was interested in moving in a different direction with a different model. So that's really what precipitated our thinking to what are the different ways that we might make investments in impulse breeding for the future.
If my mic is still on, that tells me that the CDC must have been the unhappy party if they supplied notice to that, which leads me to my next question. Has the parting of ways been amicable with the CDC? Has SPG spent any money to hire lawyers to have a conversation or two, or like how did that whole thing unwind? That's a fair question.
I can take that one, Gary. So yeah, as you can imagine, if you were involved in the development of the original agreement, it's a complex agreement, and it takes some time to wind that down and sort through those details. So yeah, it has taken some time and a significant amount of work to do that. But I would say that from my perspective at least has been amicable. Yeah, and we're interested in sort of how we move past the wind down of the existing agreement to how we partner with the CDC and with others going forward. So we remain very open to continuing to work with CDC on all the pulse crops, but in the different model that they're interested in. I think the other thing to recognize too is that things have changed with regards to the size of the overall market, the number of acres, new plant breeders' rights legislation that has come into place in Canada over that time period. That may make other models more attractive for breeders like CDC and others as well. So, we understand why the CDC may be looking at different models, and that really isn't an issue for us. Our focus is more on how do we make good investments to get good varieties for growers for the future.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Gary. I think we'll move on to Corey Nesterov with a question about Clearfield. I think you have audio now, Corey.
Yeah, just a straight up question. Does that Clearfield commitment fee or requirement still exist for Clearfield lentils, or are farmers allowed to spray like an Adama type product on there if the price is substantially cheaper?
As far as I know, the Clearfield commitment is still in full effect. I don't know if anybody has anything different to tell me, but as far as I know, it's still fully in effect.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, Dave Marzolf, you've got a question on BASF.
Yeah, just a question about their residuals and any updates on that. And I have another question about the CP Rail buying out that Kansas City railway, does that open up opportunities moving pulses north-south as opposed to east-west? Thanks.
Okay, I think I'll start out and then I'll hand off to Carl to add anything that I miss. On the BASF carryover issue, we released a statement here last week, kind of pretty clearly laying out some recommendations to growers and our stance on it. I guess SPG's role in this is we're going to be trying to be supportive of producers and release any information that we can that'll be give information to producers on the practices that they should be following to minimize any of the potential risks. Yeah, Carl, was there anything else that I'm?
Yeah, no, not too much to add on that one, Sean.
Yeah. And then as far as the CP, I wasn't aware that that had happened. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add on that.
Yeah, I guess, just peripherally aware of the CP Kansas City merger, but we haven't looked at, what that might mean in terms of, any more opportunities for, for shipment, through the US. So I don't have any further information on that, Dave.
I'm sure, Dave, that someone at Pulse Canada could give us more information on that. I know they've got staff that deals with that. If you want more information, I can make sure that you get that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Tony Quick has a question regarding CEC. You should have audio control now, Tony. Yeah, there you go. You've got audio control now. Tony, can you hear us?
So Tony just put in the chat that he can hear us. He may be having microphone issues because he's unmuted, but we're not hearing him. So we may have to, Tony, ask you to put it into the chat if possible.
We'll give Tony a second to write out the question in the chat.
Is there any other questions that we can address in the meantime?
Okay, it says he believes we've answered the question in regards to CDC. Thanks, Tony. The next question we have is Majid Benjalain regarding new projects with CDC. If we give Majid audio control.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
I just have a question with regard to the CDC. You've talked about 1.2 million in funding for 21. So what happened with the new project with the CDC? What kind of difference compared to what the previous agreement?
Yeah, so those agreements that we spoke, or those funding, those projects that we spoke about, that'll be funding through ADF, and that will be more short-term projects, not in the way that we formerly had a kind of a broad scope exclusive agreement with CDC.
Does it include any royalty payment to CDC?
Yeah, so yeah, Majid, those are projects that came through the SAS government ADF call for proposals. So we were one of the co-funders along with WGRF, Ministry of Agriculture, I think Alberta Pulse Growers on the P1, and hopefully I'm not forgetting any other co-funders there. So yeah, as Sean mentioned, those aren't long-term breeding agreements like we've had with the CDC in the past. They're more short-term, projects to provide funding for breeding in the interim, before, as a way, I think, to fund CDC breeding programs for those crops. So I can't speak to specifics about details within those contracts overall, but that's how they differ relative to, more of the long-term 15-year agreements that we've had in the past.
Okay. Thank you, Majid. I don't see more hands up. I'll ask again we got lots of time here for questions. So if anyone else has any questions, definitely feel free to raise your hand or approach one of the mics in the room. Okay. Okay, well, that'll wrap up our grower Q&A. Thank you for all the questions today. We really appreciate the engagement from producers, and we thought that it was important to allow an opportunity for questions and commentary in this format. That brings our AGM 2022 to a close. Thank you for joining us wherever you may be today. Stay tuned for announcements about SPG's winter extension meetings. As of today, we'll be back in local communities this year with stops starting in January 25th in Assiniboia. We'll also be visiting Melfort, Elrose, Etonia, and Davidson. However, we will make announcements if that will change. All meetings will also be streamed for virtual attendance as well, to attend from the comfort of your home, shop, or wherever you may be this winter. We hope to see you join us over the next few months. That concludes our meeting today, and thank you all very much.